Welcome back to another Bellows Blades video. So as you guys probably know, if you watched the last video that I had uploaded, I recently got the Spyderco YoJumbo Blade HQ exclusive with the CPM M4 steel in the blade and the natural jade G10 handle scales. And if you watch that video, you'll know that I mentioned that I was going to do some modifications. So as you're looking at it right now, this is the unmodified version as it came from Blade HQ. And I did have to do some modifications because those kind of peaks and valleys in the handle were just not positioned right for my hand and were causing hot spots where the peaks were resting right square in the center of my fingers. So I decided I was going to have to do something about that. And so I just wanted to take a minute to do a quick video and show you the results of my modifications. And so here it is before it was modified, and then here it is after I completed my modifications. So as you can see, clearly I dyed the handle scales and removed those ridges that were in the handle right there. And so this is what it looks like after modifying that handle. And you're going to see there that it's kind of got this blue, almost like a translucent blue color. So you can still kind of see through the scales. And I'll get into why I think that occurred here in a minute. But I'm going to see if I can get a little better light in here. That's about as good as I'm going to get, I think. So you can see there, though, what I did is smooth out those handle scales so that there is now no peaks or ridges in that handle. It's just straight across. That works better for my hands. I do have to say, you know, I wish that I could have left it a little thicker so that it didn't taper quite so thin. I mean, it still works well on the hand, especially with that aggressive texture in the G10. But that was the only way to get rid of those. I've seen some people who just kind of shallow them out so that they're not so aggressive. But for me, that still wouldn't have worked, because even if they were just kind of hills instead of peaks, they still would have rested right squarely on my fingers and it wouldn't have been comfortable. So removing them completely was really the only way to get a comfortable grip there on that handle. And the only thing I will mention, if anybody decides to do this yourself, that you've got to be really careful about, and I really came close to going too far, is this thing kind of has like nested liners in the G10, and where those peaks come up, that G10 gets really close. Let's see if you can kind of see there. Really, really close to that handle when you make it a straight line. So you can see I almost got down to the metal of the liner. Just barely missed getting down to that. So it doesn't leave a whole lot of, you know, material between the outside edge of the liner and the outside edge of the handle. So I mentioned about kind of this color here and dyeing this. So I want to talk just a little bit about that. But before I do, two things that I missed in the video when I uploaded the original video. One was I wanted to compare this to the other Spyderco that I had in CPM M4, and that is the Spyderco Shaman. And so you can see here that the Shaman has a much shorter sharpened edge. When you compare the sharpened edges, you've got, you know, quite a bit of shorter sharpened edge and even a shorter blade overall. Although from the handle scale to the tip is not that big of a difference. You've got quite a bit smaller handle itself. And of course, this one is micarta and this one is G10. I like the feel of micarta in my hand better, but this is a very aggressively textured G10, so you still get good grip either way. So that's kind of comparing my two Spydercos that I have that have the CPM M4. All right, so the other thing that I did not do that a lot of people like to see, although it's kind of uncommon to find a knife that won't do this out of the box, you know, it is obviously very, very sharp right out of the box. Slicing paper is not, and there I just snagged it. Slicing paper is not really an issue for this thing if that's all you're trying to do. And that snag was more the way that I, instead of sliding the knife through the paper, I kind of just bunched it up there on the blade. But so anyway, that's basically the two things that I didn't cover with the last video, comparing it there to the Shaman, which, as you can see, like I said, you know, while somewhat similar in size, the Shaman definitely is a shorter knife overall, both in the blade and the handle. And of course, the blade does come razor sharp. Of course, if it didn't, it'd be easy enough to sharpen. But when you're paying the kind of money that you do for, you know, Spydercos and similar knives, you like to think that they would at least come sharp, because you can buy $20 knives on Amazon a lot of times that come razor sharp. Which is why sometimes I forget to show that on video, just because my expectation is that every knife should be able to do that new out of the box. But sometimes you're disappointed and it doesn't. So it's worth just showing that this one does. All right, so moving on to the handle scales. I was originally trying to go for a kind of a solid dark blue. I didn't really want to have this kind of almost translucent look to it. But I think I made basically, well, I made one mistake, and then I kind of just called it good, because my wife and kids really like this color, and so they're like, oh, don't change it. And so I thought, well, I like it enough, I'll keep it the way it is. I can always re-dye it later if I need to. So as many of you are probably familiar, the most common way to dye G10 handle scales is with a Rit dye. But I had never done it before, and so this was my first attempt, and I made kind of a rookie mistake. So the dye that I got was this here, which is Rit Royal Blue All-Purpose Dye. I did not realize that their liquid dyes came in two different kinds, and what I should have gotten was this right here, which is the Rit Dyeing Synthetic. And now this is a sapphire blue. I didn't see in the store that I went to anyway. They didn't have the royal blue. So this is probably what I should have used. This is what I did use. So this stuff just sticks better to the synthetic materials from my understanding. It does a better job dyeing those, and of course G10 is a synthetic material. This did kind of work, but it was a much longer, harder process than it probably would have been had I used the right dye. So anybody else who goes out there and decides that they're going to try and dye their handle scales, I would just recommend use the Rit Dyeing Synthetic. My understanding is that'll work better, although I haven't tested it yet. I did go ahead and pick up a bottle, so the next time I do it, I can see how that compares. So basically what I did with this, you know, you're supposed to heat up the dye. And a lot of people will do that in like a stainless steel pot. I didn't want to mess up one of my stainless steel pots. I didn't think it was safe to be cooking in it after I've used it to heat up dye. So I actually thought, well, if the point of the dye is that it's hot and it takes better that way, basically what I did is I got an old glass, like an old drinking glass that was tall enough, and I put the dye, water, and then I also mixed a little bit of vinegar and Dawn dish soap. Supposedly those two things help it take better. And so I mixed all that into a glass, and I heated it in the microwave until I got it just at the point where it was just starting to bubble, starting to boil. And then I took it out and I suspended the handle scales into that hot dye mixture. And I started out doing it by like 15-minute increments. And it was dyeing so slowly that after I had dyed it basically for about, I don't know, 45 minutes maybe, it had still not gotten very dark, so I actually had to run into town to do something. So I heated up one last time and put it in the dye, and it was probably in that dye for a good hour before I got it back out of the dye. So overall, I would say it was anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours that this thing was in dye. And you can see this is the result of that dye, using, again, the regular Rit dye and not the made for synthetic dye. So I do think that I would have had maybe different results had I used the synthetic dye instead of the regular dye. But honestly, I don't really mind the way that this turned out. It does still have, like I said, kind of that almost you can see through aspect to it, that translucent aspect. But it does look pretty good. And I've been wearing this in my pocket quite a bit. I haven't actually used the knife too much other than just opening some boxes and stuff at this point. But it hasn't really shown any real wear on the knife as far as the color fading too much or anything like that. But I assume that if that does happen, then I can just turn around and I'll dye it again using that sapphire blue synthetic dye instead. So guys, that's really the only thing that I did to modify it. One other modification I would love to do, and one other con that I didn't list in my first video, has to do with, excuse me, has to do with the compression lock, right? So this is also a problem on the Shaman as well. So in fact, let me show you that one first, With the Shaman, you have this kind of little nub here that when it closes, you can see there, well, maybe you can see there if I can get the lighting where you can see it. Black on black doesn't really help. But there, that little nub actually shows, it kind of comes into that finger groove right there, and it hits your finger. So when you're closing it, you see right there, it just bounced. That's because right there, that's hitting my finger if my finger's still in that compression lock. You have to get used to actually moving your finger out of the way and kind of slapping the blade shut using your momentum. So that's just something that I've kind of had to get used to in there. I'm not doing it very well, but how to kind of get used to with the Shaman, that you've kind of got to flip it closed and move your hand out of the way. You have to do the same thing here, which is a little odd because you can see they don't have that same nub here. So you wouldn't expect that to be the case. But when this closes, you can see there a little bit easier because it's not black on black. You see that little kind of nub that is hitting right where your finger goes into that groove. So I've seen people take and grind that out, and I really wouldn't mind doing that. And I actually honestly may still end up doing it at some point. But the only reason that I haven't is because with this M4 blade being DLC coated, I really don't want to, I can't put that DLC back on there once I've ground that out. So I really don't want to do that if I don't have to. And honestly, I've gotten so used to moving my finger out of the way with the Shaman that it's not that big of a deal for me to just kind of slap it closed and move my finger out of the way. But that is a huge con for a lot of people. There are a lot of complaints about the compression lock knives where this, in essence, is a design flaw, and I agree with that. There's no reason to build the knife so that you have a foreign piece of metal slapping into that groove where your finger goes. Now, some people are going to say that's a huge deal. Other people are going to say, suck it up, it's not a big deal. Why are you complaining about it? And honestly, I can kind of see both sides of that. So I think that it's silly that a little more thought wasn't put into the design to avoid it, but I also don't think that it's the end of the world because it is not that hard to just move your finger out of the way. So I just wanted to hit that real quick as well. So covered everything as far as how I did the handle. You know, and again, I commented about dyeing. I didn't comment about how I ground this out. So maybe just real quick comment on that. So I actually have a belt grinder. That's what I use to grind these handle scales down or sand them down smooth. One thing you'll have to be a little careful of if you're doing this, or a couple things. One is G10, as you're sanding it or grinding it down, you want to make sure that you're wearing respiratory protection because you don't want those particles in your lungs. So always be safe when you're doing that. Secondly, this edge is kind of chamfered, and that could be a challenge for some to get a good, you know, what almost looks like a factory chamfer on that. Honestly, I wasn't too worried about it, and I just did it by hand real quickly. Didn't spend a lot of time worrying about whether or not it was exact. And I don't think that you can hardly tell that it wasn't done from the factory. I think it turned out really well. So that's really what I did. This literally, as far as taking these down, took me 5 minutes to do that. And so it was a super simple process just to hit that on the belt sander, belt grinder, and get that smoothed out and straightened out there. And like I said, just if you're going to do any grinding or sanding on G10, make sure you're wearing respiratory protection. So that's it, guys. That's the modification. Tell me what you think. Do you like it? Did you like it better before it was modified? Do you like the modifications that were done, whether the color or even just the actual modifying of the handle shape? Honestly, I got to say, as far as looks, I really preferred what it looked like before. As far as the shape of the handle, I do prefer the color now, but the shape of the handle before I preferred, but it just was not something that was comfortable in my hand. So as far as aesthetics, I liked it better before, but as far as comfort and usability, I feel like it's a huge improvement now. So guys, sound off, let me know what you think, and stay tuned for our next video. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already done that. Thanks.